Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're about to kick off a pretty ambitious project.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 61-part series,
Wow.
and it's going to be diving deep into Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy.
That's quite the undertaking.
It is, yeah. It's a philosophical marathon, you could say, and I'm really excited you're joining us for the very first leg of this marathon.
And I'm excited to be here to guide everyone through it.
Now, I know 61 parts might sound a little intimidating.
A little bit.
But don't worry, we're not going to try and sprint through the entire book all at once.
Oh, no. We're going to take our time.
Yeah, we'll be breaking it down piece by piece, excerpt by excerpt.
Bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. And for this first episode,
Okay.
we're going to be starting with episode 15, The Theory of Ideas.
It's a good one.
It is.
It's a good place to start.
It really is. And the best part is, you really don't need any background in philosophy to follow along with us.
No, not at all.
Whether you're, a history fanatic or, maybe you're a teenager who's just starting to explore these big ideas for the first time.
Yeah.
We're going to guide you through it all.
That's right. We'll unpack some of the complex ideas, highlight those aha moments,
Right.
and, maybe have a few laughs along the way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And so speaking of, exploring those big ideas, today we're going to be starting with Plato.
Okay.
Now, most people know Plato is this student of Socrates.
Another giant in philosophy.
Exactly, another philosophical heavyweight. But what really sets Plato apart is his exploration into what he called forms or ideas.
And it's really important to remember the context here.
Okay.
When we talk about Plato, right?
Yeah.
Plato lived in a world that was constantly in flux.
Yeah.
Empires rose and fell, seasons changed, people were born and they died.
Yeah. Constant change all
It's
around.
very fluid, very temporary. And in the middle of all of this change, Plato was really searching for something eternal, something that was truly real and unchanging.
Wow. So he was looking for something that transcended all of that change.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. So to kind of get at that, he came up with this theory of ideas.
Right.
And I've got to say, this can be a little mind-boggling at first,
It can be.
but I think it's going to get really fascinating. So bear with us here.
Okay.
So Plato believed that the physical world,
Okay.
the world that we see and touch and experience every single day,
This world.
is just a shadow
A shadow.
of a higher, truer reality, and that reality is the world of forms.
Okay, I like that the world of forms.
Yeah.
So what we see here is not really the real deal.
Kind of, yeah.
It's like a copy.
Yeah, like a cup.
Like we're seeing a copy of the real thing.
Exactly. And so
And the real things are these forms.
exactly. So
Yeah.
think about it like this. You see a beautiful sunset,
Okay, beautiful sunset.
right? But that sunset, as stunning as it is really just a reflection, a participant in the eternal form of beauty.
Okay, so there's like this,
It's like a blueprint.
like a blueprint, like the ultimate ideal sunset.
Yeah, the ideal sunset.
Okay,
And what we see
is like
just
an example,
Yeah.
a version of that perfect sunset.
Okay, so these forms are kind of like the perfect blueprints.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay,
The ultimate ideals for everything that we experience in this world.
right. And they exist
Yeah,
separately from our world.
they exist outside of time and space.
Wow.
So they're abstract.
Right.
They're perfect.
Okay.
They're unchanging.
So they're kind of like the essence of things.
They're the true reality behind the way things appear.
Right. Okay. And this is where Plato's famous allegory of the cave comes into play.
Right. You've probably heard of this one.
Yeah, this is a pretty famous one where he talks about these prisoners who are trapped in a cave and all they can see are shadows on the wall.
Right.
And they mistake those shadows for reality.
They have no idea that there's a whole world outside the cave
Right.
that's actually casting those shadows.
Right. And so Plato's saying
Yeah.
that we're all kind of like those prisoners.
Well, a little bit. Yeah.
We're mistaking the shadows, the physical world, for the true reality of the forms.
It's kind of a humbling thought.
It is.
Yeah.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
And it gets even more interesting when you start to think about
Yeah.
what these forms actually are.
Yes.
We've talked about beauty, but Plato believed that there were forms for all sorts of concepts,
Oh, yeah.
like justice, truth, goodness.
All the big ones.
Yeah, all the important ones.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, there's a perfect form of justice out there.
Right.
And every just law or action in our world
Mm-hmm.
is just an attempt to participate in that perfect ideal.
That's a good way to put it. It's like we're trying to reach that perfect ideal, but we can never quite get there.
Yeah, because we're stuck in the cave.
We are, in a way. Yeah, we're limited by our perspective
Right.
and by the limitations of the physical world.
Yeah. And so these forms are like the ultimate measuring stick.
That's right.
The benchmarks.
Yeah, the gold standard.
The gold standard against which we measure everything
exactly
in our world. But this brings up a pretty big question.
Okay, what's that?
If these forms aren't physical things, how do we even know about them?
How do we access them?
How do we access this realm of perfect ideals?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Because we can't see them, we can't touch them,
right?
We can't smell them, taste them.
Right. How do we know they're even there?
Well, Plato had an answer for that.
Okay.
And his answer was reason.
Okay.
He believed that true knowledge doesn't actually come from our senses, but from our ability to reason, to think abstractly.
Oh, okay.
To use logic.
Okay, so it's like a mathematician
Yes.
who can conceive of a perfect straight line or a perfect circle,
Yeah.
even though we never actually see those perfect shapes in the physical world.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Because those shapes, they exist in the mind as abstract concepts.
Right.
And Plato believed that our minds have this incredible ability
Yeah.
to grasp these eternal truths, these perfect forms.
Even though they go beyond what we experience with our senses.
Even though they transcend our immediate sensory experience.
Wow. Okay, so this is getting really interesting.
It is, right?
We've got this picture of the physical world being kind of like this shadow play.
A pale imitation.
And then there's this world of forms, this realm of perfect, unchanging ideals.
The real deal.
The real deal. And we access these forms through our ability to reason.
Through our capacity for abstract thought.
Exactly. Okay, so we're starting to build this picture of Plato's world.
We're getting there.
But now I think we need to introduce a little wrinkle.
Oh, there's always a wrinkle.
There's always a wrinkle. And that wrinkle is that Plato himself recognized that this whole theory of forms wasn't without its problems.
Oh, so even Plato had some doubts.
It seems so, yeah. So what were some of the challenges to his theory?
Well, I mean, it does sound a little out there when you really stop and think about it.
Yeah, it does. So, like, what were people saying?
Well, people raised all sorts of objections.
Like,
for instance, how do we know these forms actually exist?
Right, that's a big one.
If we can't see them or touch them.
Right. It's kind of a mystical idea.
It is a little bit.
Like, how can we be sure?
And then there's the question of participation.
Participation.
How do physical objects participate in the forms?
Right.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, like how does that beautiful sunset
How does it connect?
actually connect to the abstract form of beauty?
Yeah.
What does that connection look like?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. So did Plato have any answers to these challenges?
He did.
Okay.
He didn't just shrug and say, well, it's a mystery.
Yeah.
He actually wrestled with these questions quite a bit.
Okay.
And in some of his later dialogues, like the Parmenides,
Okay.
we see him really grappling with these challenges.
Wow, so he was willing to admit
He was just,
that even his own theory
yes.
might have some holes in it.
He was willing to question his own assumptions.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
It shows a real commitment to intellectual honesty.
I think so too. It makes him even more interesting as a philosopher.
I think so too.
Okay, so we've got this complex, even controversial theory forms. But before we jump into all of the challenges and implications of it, I think we need to understand one of the key influences on Plato's thinking, and that is mathematics.
Ah, yes, the language of the universe,
Exactly.
some might say.
Exactly. And it's probably no coincidence that Plato was really influenced by the Pythagoreans.
Right. Those guys loved numbers.
They believed that numbers held the key to understanding the cosmos.
Yeah, and they saw mathematical harmony everywhere.
And that's interesting because there's that famous inscription over the entrance to Plato's Academy.
I've heard of this one.
Yeah. Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here.
That statement.
It's a big statement.
It's like a prerequisite.
It is a prerequisite for sure.
You got to know your geometry.
You got to know your geometry if you want to study with Plato.
Yeah, if you want to hang out with Plato and his crew.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how did this love of math shape Plato's philosophical ideas?
Well, for Plato,
Yeah.
math was more than just a tool for calculation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a window into the eternal, unchanging truths of the forms.
Okay.
So he saw mathematical concepts like perfect circles and triangles as examples of these forms existing in a realm beyond our senses.
So math was a way of accessing
Absolutely.
and understanding those perfect blueprints in the world of forms.
That's right. He believed that the forms themselves
Yeah.
had a mathematical structure
Hmm.
and that the universe was ultimately built
Yeah.
on mathematical principles.
So by studying math, we could understand the true nature of reality.
That was the idea.
That's a pretty radical idea
It is.
for someone in ancient Greece.
Yeah, they were ahead of their time in many ways.
I think so too. But before we get
Too carried away.
Too carried away with the abstract math.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back down to earth.
Back to reality.
Why should we care about Plato's theory of ideas today?
Right.
Over 2,000 years
Right.
after he was writing, what's the relevance for us living in the 21st century?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's a question we're going to be exploring throughout this whole series.
Okay.
But let me just offer a couple of thoughts to get us started.
Okay, I'd love to hear them.
Well, first of all, Plato's ideas are still incredibly influential.
Okay.
They've shaped philosophical and theological and political debates for centuries.
Right.
So whether we realize it or not,
Yeah.
we're all swimming in a sea of ideas that have been influenced by Plato.
Right, whether it's our conceptions of justice and truth,
Exactly.
or even our understanding of the soul and the afterlife.
All of those things have been touched
Wow.
by Plato's thinking in some way.
So even if we don't consciously think about Plato
Right.
every day,
Right.
his ideas are kind of baked into our culture
I think that's a good way to put it.
and our ways of thinking.
They're part of the air we breathe,
Yeah.
the intellectual atmosphere.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And secondly,
Yeah.
Plato's theory of forms
Okay.
challenges us to really think critically about the nature of reality.
It does.
Is the world we see all there is,
And-
or is there something more,
Something deeper.
something we can only access
Yeah.
through reason and contemplation?
Those are big questions.
Yeah, big questions.
And they're questions that resonate with people of all ages.
I think so.
Whether you're a teenager
Yeah,
trying to figure out your place in the world,
great.
or you're a little bit further along
Yeah.
and reflecting on the meaning of life.
I think Plato has something to offer everyone.
I think so too.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So Plato's not just giving us answers.
Right.
He's pushing us to ask better questions,
Exactly.
to really dig deeper into
Yeah.
our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
To seek a richer understanding.
And in a world that's, kind of obsessed
Yeah.
with superficiality and instant gratification.
Yeah. We're bombarded with distractions.
That's a really powerful message.
I think so too. It's a call to slow down,
Yeah.
to think deeply,
To look beyond the surface.
to seek the true and the good.
And that's something we could all benefit from.
Absolutely. It's a timeless message.
It is a timeless message.
It's as relevant today as it was back then.
Yeah, I think so too.
So that's a good place to wrap up part one
Yeah.
of our dive into Plato's theory of ideas.
I agree, but don't go anywhere.
Oh no, stay tuned.
Because in part 2,
Yes.
we're going to explore the implications of this theory.
We're going to get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, we're going to look at its impact on political thought.
How it shaped people's views on government and society.
Yeah, and its connections to Christian theology.
Yeah, that's a fascinating connection.
And we'll also delve into Bertrand Russell's critique of Plato,
Right.
highlighting where he agreed and where he diverged from this philosophical giant.
Because even though Russell had a lot of respect for Plato, he didn't always agree with him.
No, and those disagreements are really insightful.
I think so too.
So stay with us. It's going to be a fascinating journey
It is a journey,
through the world of ideas.
a philosophical adventure.
Exactly.
So buckle up.
Buckle up.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for understanding Plato's theory of forms, this idea that there's a realm of perfect, unchanging essences, like behind the everyday world that we all experience.
Right.
But now I think we need to consider
Yeah.
some of the implications of this theory.
Okay.
How does it affect the way that we think about things like ethics and politics
Bro,
and even religion?
that's what I'm really curious about because
Yeah.
we've talked about the abstract ideas.
Yeah.
But how does this theory actually play out in real life? Like, how did Plato's ideas about forms
Right.
shape his views on how society should be run, for instance?
Oh, that's a great question. And it takes us straight to the heart of Plato's political philosophy. Okay.
So remember, he believed that true knowledge
Yeah.
lies in grasping these eternal forms,
Right.
these perfect blueprints for justice and goodness and all the rest.
Right. So how does that translate to governing a society?
Well, Plato believed that only those with true knowledge of the good, those who had spent their lives contemplating these forms,
Okay.
were truly fit to rule.
So he believed in philosopher kings.
He believed in philosopher kings.
That sounds pretty idealistic,
It does a little bit.
to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine the campaign slogans now like, vote for Socrates, he knows the form of justice.
Right.
Exactly. But Plato was serious about this idea.
Really?
He truly believed that most people were too easily swayed by their emotions or by just superficial appearances
Right.
to make wise decisions about governing.
So you couldn't just rely on popular opinion or even democratic processes?
No, he didn't think so.
To ensure good leadership, you needed someone who had a deep understanding.
Yeah, you needed someone who could see beyond the shadows.
Right.
The true forms of justice and goodness.
Exactly. Plato believed that a society ruled by philosopher kings would be the most just and harmonious society.
Okay.
Because those rulers would be guided by true knowledge, not by self-interest or fleeting passions.
But wasn't that idea met with some skepticism?
Oh, of course.
Even back in Plato's time.
Absolutely. It's not a very practical idea.
No, it's not. How do you even identify these philosopher kings?
Right.
And what's to stop them from becoming tyrants?
Yeah.
Even if they do know the form of the good.
All good points. And those are actually some of the main criticisms that have been leveled against Plato's political philosophy throughout history. You know, it's one thing to talk about these ideal forms, in the abstract, but it's quite another to translate them into an actual functioning political system.
Right. It sounds like Plato may have been a little too idealistic.
Maybe so.
A little too disconnected from the messy realities.
Yeah. He was definitely an idealist.
Of political power.
Yeah. And as we'll see later when we talk about Aristotle,
okay,
Plato's own student
okay,
had some pretty strong criticisms
Interesting.
of this whole idea of philosopher kings.
Okay.
But even though Plato's political ideas might seem impractical, they still raise some really important questions.
Like what kind of questions?
About the nature of leadership.
Okay.
And the role of knowledge in governance.
Okay, so we've covered Plato's political philosophy.
We have.
What about his influence on religion?
Okay.
Particularly Christianity. You mentioned that earlier.
Oh, yes. That's a fascinating connection.
Yeah.
So Plato's ideas about the eternal world of forms really resonated with early Christian thinkers who were trying to articulate their own understanding of God and the divine realm.
I can see how those ideas would overlap.
Right.
The concept of a perfect, unchanging God existing beyond the physical world seems to align really well with Plato's ideas about the forms.
Absolutely. Christian theologians saw in Plato's philosophy a way to express this idea of God as transcendent, as the ultimate source of goodness and truth, and the idea of the soul's immortality, which Plato also explored, found a very natural home in Christian theology.
So Plato's philosophy kind of provided an intellectual framework.
It did. It offered a language. For early Christians to articulate their beliefs.
That's really interesting. And this connection between Plato and Christian thought had a huge impact on the development of Western civilization.
It did.
It shaped theological debates.
It did.
Influenced artistic expression.
Yes.
And even impacted political structure.
Absolutely. It's amazing how these ancient ideas can have such a lasting impact.
It really is. So even though Plato lived centuries before the rise of Christianity, his ideas had this ripple effect.
They did. They rippled through time.
That extended far beyond his own time and place.
That's the power of ideas.
It is the power of ideas.
They can transcend time and space.
So we've covered Plato's political views.
We have.
And his influence on Christianity. What about Bertrand Russell?
Okay.
What was his take on Plato?
Right. Well, remember, Russell had this kind of complex relationship with Plato's ideas.
He admired him, but he also had some criticisms.
Exactly. He didn't just blindly accept Plato's theories. He wrestled with them, challenged them, and ultimately he agreed with some and rejected others.
Okay, so where did he stand on the whole theory of forms? Did he buy into it?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Russell acknowledged the power of Plato's reasoning.
Okay.
Especially his critique of this view that knowledge is simply perception.
Right, like the Theaetetus.
Yes, in the Theaetetus.
Plato argues that knowledge is more than just what we experience with our senses.
Exactly. He uses those examples, like knowing that two things are different even if we can't perceive them both simultaneously.
Right, so there's something more to knowledge.
Yes, there's more to it than just sensory data.
Than just that immediate experience.
Right. And Russell seems to agree with this basic premise.
Okay.
He recognizes that our minds play an active role in shaping our understanding of the world.
Right. We use reason and logic to go beyond just the immediate input of our senses.
Exactly.
But then where does the disagreement come in?
Okay, well, while Russell acknowledges the importance of reason and abstract thought, he takes issue with this idea that these forms exist in some separate eternal realm.
Okay, so he's not buying into that whole separate realm of perfect essences.
Not really. He sees it as an unnecessary leap.
Okay.
A metaphysical assumption that's not really supported by evidence.
So Russell's more grounded in what we can observe.
Yeah, he's more empirical.
And experience, whereas Plato's venturing into this realm of abstract, unprovable concepts.
Right. Russell's more of an empiricist. He believes that knowledge ultimately comes from experience, from our interactions with the physical world.
Okay.
He argues that we can explain our concepts and our knowledge without resorting to these otherworldly forms.
So for Russell, Plato's theory of forms is a little too mystical.
Maybe a little bit.
A little too detached from the concrete realities of experience.
He was always striving for clarity and simplicity in his philosophical explanations.
Right.
He wanted to avoid unnecessary metaphysical baggage.
I see.
Yeah.
But even though he rejects the theory of forms,
Yeah.
Russell still recognizes Plato's importance, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. He sees Plato as a pivotal figure in the history of philosophy.
Okay.
He credits Plato with raising these fundamental questions about the nature of knowledge and reality.
Yeah.
And the good life. And he acknowledges the profound influence that Plato has had on subsequent philosophical and theological debates.
Right. Like we were saying earlier, even if we don't agree with everything Plato said,
right,
we have to understand his ideas.
We do.
To really engage in these conversations about these big questions of life.
Exactly. Plato's foundational figure, his ideas continue to shape how we think about the world.
Right.
Even if we end up, modifying or even rejecting some of his specific conclusions.
Right.
Now, before we move on to part 3, where we unpack Bertrand Russell's critique of Plato in more detail, I just want to emphasize one point that I think often gets lost in discussions about Plato.
Okay, what's that?
It's easy to get caught up in the complexities of the theory of forms and to miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
But at the heart of Plato's philosophy is this really deep and enduring message, a call to seek wisdom, to strive for the good, to live a life guided by something more than just fleeting pleasures and selfish desires.
That's a message that's as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece.
Absolutely. I think so too. You know, in a world that often seems so obsessed with superficiality and instant gratification, that call to look beyond the surface, to seek the true and the good, it's more important than ever.
Well said, and that's a great note to end part 2 on. But don't go anywhere. Because in part 3, we'll delve into Bertrand Russell's insightful and often critical analysis of Plato's ideas.
We'll get into the nitty-gritty.
We'll see where he agrees.
Yeah.
And where he diverges from this philosophical giant.
It's going to be a thought-provoking exploration.
I can't wait.
Of one of the most influential thinkers in Western history.
So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey so far exploring Plato's theory of forms, its impact on politics and religion, and even getting a glimpse of Bertrand Russell's perspective on this philosophical giant.
Yeah. And now in this final part, we're really going to dig into Russell's analysis of Plato.
Okay, sounds good.
Remember, Russell had this really interesting blend of admiration and criticism when it came to Plato.
Right. He recognized Plato's brilliance.
Oh, absolutely.
But he wasn't afraid to point out the flaws and limitations in his thinking.
He wasn't afraid to challenge him.
No, he wasn't. And that's what makes his critique so insightful.
Yeah.
He was engaging with Plato as an intellectual equal.
Right, not just a blind follower.
Not just a worshiper.
Yeah.
At the altar of, ancient wisdom.
Exactly. So let's break down some of the key points of agreement and disagreement between these two philosophical heavyweights.
Okay. I'm ready. Where should we start?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Russell really agreed with Plato's critique of the idea that knowledge is simply perception.
Right.
Remember, Plato argued that our knowledge goes beyond what we immediately experience with our senses.
Right. He used those examples like knowing that two things are different.
Yeah.
Even if we can't perceive them both at the same time.
Exactly. He said we can know things without necessarily seeing them or touching them right in that moment.
Right. So there's something more to knowledge than just that immediate sensory data.
Absolutely. And Russell found that argument very compelling.
Okay.
He also believed that our minds play an active role in shaping our understanding of the world, that we use reason and logic to go beyond the raw data of our senses.
So both Plato and Russell acknowledge that there's more to knowledge than just seeing, hearing, touching, and so on.
Right.
There's this element of reasoning, of abstract thought that allows us to make connections and grasp concepts that go beyond our immediate experience.
Absolutely. And that shared belief in the importance of reason is a key point of agreement between Plato and Russell.
But that's kind of where their paths diverge.
Right.
I was wondering when those forms were going to make a comeback.
Right. So Russell wasn't totally sold on this whole separate realm of perfect essences.
Yeah, so where did he disagree with Plato?
Well, while he appreciated the elegance of Plato's theory of forms, he ultimately saw it as kind of an unnecessary metaphysical leap. Remember, Plato believed that the physical world is just a pale imitation of this higher realm of perfect, unchanging forms.
Right, so for Plato, the true reality lies in those forms.
Yeah.
And the physical world is kind of just a shadow play.
A mere reflection.
A reflection.
Of the true reality. But Russell argued that we can account for knowledge and understanding without having to resort to these otherworldly forms. He believed we can explain our concepts and our knowledge by analyzing how our minds interact with the world through our senses and through the process of reasoning.
So he's saying we can build a good understanding of the world based on our experiences and our ability to think logically without needing to bring in these mystical forms.
That's right. He didn't see the need to invoke those unobservable entities to explain how we acquire knowledge.
So he's advocating for a more grounded, empirically based approach to understanding knowledge and reality.
More down to earth.
More down to earth.
Less metaphysical.
Less metaphysical.
That's metaphysical.
More practical.
So Plato's reaching for this higher transcendent realm.
Yes, reaching for the heaven.
While Russell's more focused on what we can observe. And reason about within the world that we experience.
What we can see and touch and measure. Exactly. That's a great way to kind of summarize their different approaches.
Two different perspectives on knowledge and reality.
But it's important to note that even though Russell rejected the theory of forms, he still recognized Plato's genius.
Oh, absolutely.
And his lasting impact on Western thought.
He was a giant.
Like we talked about earlier. Plato's ideas have shaped so much of our culture.
Everything from politics to religion to art to literature.
It's hard to overstate his influence.
It really is.
And Russell acknowledged that he saw Plato as a foundational figure.
One of the cornerstones.
Who wrestled with these really fundamental questions.
The big questions.
About the nature of knowledge and reality and the good life.
The questions that we're all still grappling with today.
And even if we don't agree with all of his answers. We can't ignore the questions that he raised.
They're still relevant.
And I think that's a key takeaway from this whole deep dive.
Absolutely.
Plato's theory of forms might be over 2,000 years old.
Ancient wisdom.
But it's still so relevant today.
It is.
It forces us to really think about what we believe.
To examine our assumptions.
How we know what we know.
The nature of knowledge.
And what really matters in life.
The good life.
And whether you lean more towards Plato's idealism or Russell's empiricism. Engaging with these ideas can only enrich our understanding of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And the world around us.
It's all about expanding our horizons.
Exactly. And that's precisely what the deep dive is all about. Encouraging you to explore these big ideas. To wrestle with different perspectives.
To think critically.
And ultimately, to arrive at your own conclusions.
To form your own opinions.
We're not here to tell you what to think.
No, we're just guides on this journey.
We're just guides through the world of ideas.
We're here to give you the tools and the context.
The intellectual scaffolding.
And to think for yourselves.
To become independent thinkers.
And so, as we wrap up this first leg of our philosophical marathon, it's been quite a run.
It has been. We want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Whether you're 16 or 60, remember that the journey of philosophical exploration is a lifelong adventure.
It's a journey without a destination.
And with 60 more excerpts to go in this series,
50 more.
We're just getting started.
It's just warming up.
So stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next leg of our journey through the history of Western philosophy.
See you next time.